On a quiet rural road in southern Ohio, there was a house that most people barely noticed. Cars passed it every day. Freight trains thundered along the nearby tracks. Neighbors mowed their lawns, collected their mail, and went about ordinary lives. The property looked neglected. Overgrown grass, scattered trash, discarded tires, broken toys, and a weathered porch that seemed frozen in time. It wasn't attractive, but in a countryside where aging homes and cluttered yards weren't uncommon, it rarely drew more than a passing glance. Then, in a single afternoon, investigators opened a door. Inside, they found something that would stun veteran law enforcement officers and leave an entire community asking the same haunting question. How could 16 children spend years hidden in plain sight without anyone realizing they were there? The discovery transformed the tiny village of Hamden, Ohio, a place of fewer than 1,000 residents, from another quiet Appalachian community into the center of one of the state's most disturbing child endangerment investigations in recent memory. For years, neighbors had assumed little about the family living there. Some had never even seen children outside the home. Others simply believed the family preferred privacy. In rural communities, where homes often sit hundreds of feet apart behind trees and brush, people learn not to pry. But privacy can sometimes become invisibility, and invisibility can become tragedy. Hamden isn't the kind of place people expect to make national headlines. Nestled in the rolling hills of southeastern Ohio, it's the sort of town where local businesses greet customers by name, holiday decorations line Main Street, and neighbors still wave as they drive past one another. When news broke that authorities had removed 16 children from a home just outside the village, disbelief spread faster than facts. Emily Collins, a nearby business owner, struggled to process it. She later described the overwhelming feeling shared by many residents that something so devastating had happened right under our noses. Only days earlier, she had been decorating the sidewalk outside her flower shop with colorful chalk drawings for the 4th of July. Flowers, stars, cheerful messages intended to brighten people's days. Now those celebrations felt strangely distant. Instead of preparing for holiday festivities, the community was trying to understand how children, ranging from a toddler to an 18-year-old, could have lived in isolation for years without teachers, pediatricians, coaches, or neighbors raising alarms. Ironically, authorities weren't searching for missing children. According to investigators, officers arrived at the property while conducting an unrelated investigation. Nothing suggested they were about to uncover one of the most significant child welfare cases the region had ever seen. But once inside the home, everything changed. Investigators later described conditions so disturbing that even experienced officers were shaken. The children, ranging in age from approximately 18 months to 18 years old, were allegedly living in severe neglect. Officials said many had spent most of their lives confined largely to a room measuring roughly 12 feet by 12 feet. Human waste was reportedly present throughout parts of the living area. Authorities described conditions as deplorable. Some of the children reportedly struggled to communicate. Several required immediate medical attention. 7 were transported to hospitals, including one child reported to be in critical condition at the time authorities announced the rescue. For investigators, the discovery immediately shifted from an ordinary investigation to an emergency rescue. The children were removed from the home. Child welfare authorities assumed temporary custody. Meanwhile, investigators began asking a question that would only grow more complicated with every answer they uncovered. Where had these children been all these years? Most children leave traces wherever they grow up. School enrollment records, doctor visits, vaccination histories, sports registrations, birthday parties, photos, friends, teachers, neighbors. In this case, investigators found remarkably little. Officials said the family had moved several times throughout southern Ohio over nearly 2 decades. The children had apparently remained outside many of the systems that normally help identify abuse or neglect. The local school district reported having no records indicating any of the children had ever attended its schools. Investigators also examined whether there had been previous contact with Child Protective Services. The absence of routine interaction with schools and medical providers became one of the investigation's most troubling themes. Experts in child welfare have long noted that teachers, school nurses, pediatricians, and counselors often become the first people to recognize signs of abuse or developmental delays. Without those regular points of contact, opportunities to intervene can disappear. The longer isolation continues, the easier it becomes for suffering to remain unseen. Joseph Stewart lived only a few houses away. Yet he later told reporters he had never really seen children outside the property. No bicycles riding through the neighborhood, no games in the yard, no groups waiting for the school bus, nothing that would suggest 16 young people lived there. From a distance, the house appeared neglected, but neglected homes are not unusual in economically struggling rural areas. Many residents assumed the family simply kept to themselves. The property itself sat near railroad tracks, partially shielded by trees and thick brush. Although visible from the road, it wasn't the kind of place where people casually stopped by. In hindsight, every small observation suddenly carried new meaning. The silence, the lack of visitors, the absence of children. At the time, none of it seemed enough to justify calling authorities. Afterward, every missed clue felt painfully obvious. Following the discovery, authorities arrested 4 members of the family. The children's parents, Gary Siders Jr. and Elizabeth Siders, along with Gary Siders Sr. and Christina Siders, were charged with child endangerment. Each pleaded not guilty. A judge set bond at $300,000 for each defendant. As the criminal process began, defense attorneys urged the public not to rush to judgment before prosecutors disclosed the evidence supporting the charges. Elizabeth Siders' attorney said that when he first met his client in jail, her initial questions centered on her children, whether they were safe, where they were, and when she might see them again. He also argued that the case might ultimately involve profound isolation rather than simple malice, emphasizing that much remained unknown while the investigation continued. Prosecutors, however, described the conditions inside the home in starkly different terms. The gap between those competing narratives would become one of the central issues as the legal process unfolded. As investigators continued documenting evidence, another reality settled over Hamden. No single person had failed these children. Instead, they appeared to have slipped through nearly every safeguard society relies upon. No teachers noticed prolonged absences, no routine medical appointments documented developmental concerns. Few neighbors saw enough to suspect 16 children were living inside. The result was a tragedy measured not only by what investigators found, but by how long it may have remained hidden. The boarded-up house now stands as a stark reminder of that silence. Behind those walls, investigators say, children spent years separated from experiences most people take for granted: classrooms, friendships, playgrounds, and ordinary childhood routines. As the criminal case moves through the courts, many questions remain unanswered. How did the family remain largely outside public systems for so long? Were there warning signs that never reached the right people? Could intervention have come years earlier? Those answers may emerge only as evidence is presented in court. For now, what is known is enough to leave an entire community grappling with the same painful thought. Sometimes the most disturbing crimes are not hidden in distant places. Sometimes they unfold quietly, behind a familiar door, in a town where everyone believes they know their neighbors. And when that door finally opens, the hardest question isn't simply what happened inside, it's why no one knew,